So Jay, I mean, we're talking about supranational agencies rationalizing the processing of the permits and the procurement in a not necessarily an ideal world, because it's something that's underway. Would that make your life easier, as you bring on board other private sector investors into some of your major projects? And can you just give us a flavor about how you at GE and GE Africa see this whole complexity around infrastructure risks?
Thanks, Hubert. I guess I would start by saying around infrastructure, and as you heard, every country is going to have a national project. And we talk about wheeling power, we talk about logistics, etc. Quite frankly, there's not a country in Africa that has enough power for its own self, let alone giving it to others. So I think it's a great idea and all, but right now I think when you look at it, we need to continue to invest and put in place more power generation, transmission, distribution capability across the continent. And I think the goal is to get megawatts onto the grid. And there's a lot of issues around that. I think some of the things that we've talked about, I mean, the financing, you've heard enough about financing around it, but quite frankly, we obviously sell power generation equipment. We also invest in the project development process and equity. And we also would be a user in that we were building factories in Africa as well. So it's for us, it's very important in the industrialization of the continent. But when you look at some of the key things, I would categorize it in a few different ways. One is about execution. Execution's difficult. You've got to work through different governments, etc. There's no standardized power purchase agreements, although power purchase agreements have been going on for 100 years. There should be lessons learned, but everyone has to be negotiated again, 100 plus pages. The consistency between governments as they transition which is also to a degree political risk, but it is an issue, especially when you're trying to do long tenured financial deals. Speed of execution is absolutely critical. We have, the average, it's 5 to 7 years to do a power plant. I'm sorry, somebody's telling me to stop talking. 5 to 7 years to do a power plant, when in reality 2 years of that is to build it. And I think the other aspect is to have this sense of urgency on the side of the user, mostly governments. We've been in a number of projects across the continent where we wait for PPAs to get approved through parliaments. Everyone talks about needing power, yet there doesn't seem to be the sense to pull it through and get it going. So I think there's a lot around that as well. And then finally is prioritization. There's been a number again, I think you heard it earlier, from a standpoint of political will to be able to push a project through. I can give you an example. In Egypt this year, or actually the tail end of last year, it was last year and the year before, in November of 2014, we negotiated a deal with Egypt, and in August, July of 2015, we brought on 2 gigawatts of power. From negotiation to power on the grid in 9 months, it can be done. But it requires somebody to push it on both sides. And the president, as you guys probably know, is a very strong president. He made sure he pushed his people as well as us. But we need that on both sides. And it's the private sector can push only so far, but when you have to wait on, and we also have some of the issues, quite frankly, on some of the banks. Well, we don't have a risk committee meeting for another 3 months. It's kind of like, that's not how business works. You got to do it all the time. So I think there's ways to think about it. So so to your answer, I've got a little bit on a soapbox, but to answer your question on regionalization, what I just said is all just local projects. So then add a level of complexity, as you've just heard, with another government, with another set of people that'll be involved, and it just makes it much more difficult. So the key for all of the financing is always how strong the offtake is, whether it's logistics, whether it's power, whether it's hospitals, anything, and I think that's the key. So, and again, you see it through a sovereign guarantee, which chews into the country's balance sheet. You can see it through some other offtake agreements and things, but those are really some of the issues, I think.
Jay, I mean, you've been involved in, obviously, your lead players, public knowledge, in the Ghana 1000 project. Can you just give us a bit of background about how you got involved and how that's moving forward? Because that's very pertinent to what we're talking about.
Well, that project was, we thought of, well, here's a classic case. So one of the issues was, obviously, Ghana needed power, but the fuel source was an issue. The West Africa gas pipeline nothing was coming from Nigeria, so they needed fuel. So the thought process was, can we do a fuel to utility capability with a floating storage unit? So we put together a project team, financiers, et cetera. Without getting too detailed around some of the nuances, they were also investing in a gas field locally, Sankofa gas field. And, you know, in what we needed, you know, and we still don't, we've been working on this deal for 4 years, Ron? 3? So we still don't have a PPA. And we have probably 20 people in Ghana specifically on this deal. We had an emergency power deal that we started in January of 2015 with the president, which we just got a PPA a month ago. So I go back to what's emergency. You know, we can react, but we need someone on the other side to pull. But I think the aspect is to try to solve, now part of the issue with the Ghana thing, one of the other things we looked at was, there's too many times players like us go into the government and say, well, you know, your tariff isn't high enough, this and that, and you know, they're not gonna raise tariffs to get another 20 megawatts on the grid. Now they will if all of a sudden you can help a third of the grid, you can add, you know, that much power, because a lot of the reason is people don't trust that the power companies are going to deliver on what the people are paying for. So I think there's a lot of that as well, and there has to be an understanding on both sides. You know, it's not all the other guy, it's us too. Right.
Thanks, Jay.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.